The Los Angeles International Airport never truly slept. Even past midnight, it pulsed with motion, rolling suitcases whispering across polished floors, soft echoes of boarding calls drifting through vast halls, fragments of conversations in 100 different accents colliding and dissolving into a constant, living hum. Screens flickered with departures and arrivals, blinking like restless eyes. People hurried. People waited. People worried. Everyone carried somewhere to be, something to prove, someone to impress. And in the middle of all of it, in the first-class boarding line, stood a man who looked as if he belonged to none of it. Keanu Reeves waited quietly, hands resting loosely on the straps of a worn black backpack. His clothes were simple, a faded plaid shirt, old jeans, scuffed boots that looked like they had walked through more than a few long years and longer roads. There was nothing about him that demanded attention. No jewelry, no sharp tailoring, no air of urgency. If anything, he looked like someone who could easily fade into the background. Yet there was something about him that made the chaos around him feel distant. While others shifted impatiently, checked watches, scrolled phones, sighed loudly, and tapped feet against the floor, Keanu stood completely still. Not rigid, not detached, just present. His eyes moved slowly across the terminal, taking in faces, families, tired workers, laughing couples, nervous solo travelers. There was no boredom in his expression, no irritation. It was as though he wasn't waiting for the moment to pass, but allowing himself to exist inside it. Behind him, the mood was very different. Victor Harding did not wait, he occupied. Everything about Victor announced him before he ever spoke. His tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly. His shoes reflected the overhead lights. His watch alone probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Even the way he stood, chest forward, shoulders back, jaw slightly raised, suggested a man accustomed to being seen, acknowledged, deferred to. Victor was not merely in the first-class line. In his mind, he belonged there. His eyes drifted lazily over the passengers ahead of him until they stopped on the back of the man directly in front. The old backpack, the wrinkled shirt, the unpolished boots. Victor's lips curved. A small sound left his throat, half a laugh, half a scoff. "Well," he said aloud, not bothering to soften his voice, "first class really isn't what it used to be." Keanu turned his head slightly. Their eyes met. Up close, Victor expected embarrassment, maybe irritation, maybe a defensive edge, something to confirm the judgment he had already made. What he saw instead unsettled him. Keanu's gaze was calm, not blank, not distant. Calm, there was no challenge in it, no submission either, just quiet awareness. "The world changes," Keanu replied gently, "so do the people in it." Victor blinked, momentarily wrong-footed. He had expected a reaction he could dominate. Instead, he received an answer that didn't invite battle at all. He smiled again, sharper this time. "Nothing personal," Victor continued, leaning slightly forward. "But you don't exactly look like the type who usually stands here." Keanu studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Maybe not," he said. "Looks can be misleading." Victor let out a soft laugh, as if amused by a child's optimism. Before he could respond, the line began to move. First-class boarding was called. The group stepped forward in a slow, controlled procession. Victor walked with confident, measured strides, phone already in hand, glancing at his reflection in the dark glass of a nearby window. Keanu followed at the same steady pace he had maintained all along, neither hurried nor delayed, as though he moved according to a rhythm no one else could hear. The jet bridge swallowed them. Inside the aircraft, warm lighting glowed over wide seats, polished surfaces, quiet luxury. Flight attendants greeted passengers by default smiles and practiced warmth. Victor checked his ticket, took 3 steps forward, then stopped. So did Keanu. They stood at the same row. Victor looked at his seat number, looked up, looked again. His jaw tightened. Keanu was already placing his backpack beneath the seat beside him. "You've got to be kidding me," Victor muttered. He slid into his seat, stiffly, his movement lacking the relaxed authority he had carried moments earlier. "Of all the seats, of all the people." Keanu buckled in, settled comfortably, and glanced over with a polite nod. "Looks like we'll be traveling together." Victor didn't answer immediately. His eyes lingered on the scuffed boots, the simple clothes, the complete absence of self-consciousness. It bothered him more than he expected. So, Victor said finally, forcing lightness into his tone, "What do you do?" Keanu adjusted the strap of his backpack and replied simply, "I work in film." Victor's eyebrows lifted. "Oh, what kind?" "Stories," Keanu said. Victor chuckled. "Commercials, independent stuff." Keanu smiled faintly. "Something like that?" Victor leaned back, crossing his arms. "Funny how people always find a way into places they don't quite fit," he said. "First class is supposed to mean something." Keanu turned slightly toward him. "Maybe it still does," he said, "just not what everyone thinks." Victor scoffed, but something in Keanu's voice, the absence of defense, the absence of performance, made the words linger longer than Victor wanted them to. The doors closed. The plane began its slow, powerful movement away from the gate. Flight attendants started offering drinks. "Champagne," Victor said immediately, smiling toward the attendant. "The good one." She nodded and turned to Keanu. "Just water, please." Victor laughed. "Water," he repeated. "You're sitting here and you choose water." Keanu accepted the bottle with a nod. Sometimes simplicity is the luxury. Victor tilted his head, studying him. "Or sometimes," he said, "it's just settling." Keanu took a slow sip before answering. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe it means you already have what you need." Victor shook his head faintly, unconvinced. The aircraft began its ascent, the city lights falling away beneath them. Around them, quiet conversations continued. A couple whispered. A businessman typed. Someone too rose back, glanced forward, eyes narrowing in recognition, then widened but said nothing. Victor, however, felt none of the peace the cabin was designed to offer. Something about the man beside him, his stillness, his refusal to compete, pressed against something Victor didn't like examining. "You know," Victor said, swirling his glass when it arrived, "life's like this section. You earn your way in, and once you're here, you enjoy the difference." Keanu set his water down. "And when the plane lands," he asked gently, "where are we?" Victor frowned. "What? Where are we when it lands?" Victor hesitated. "At the destination." Keanu nodded. "Same place." Victor stared at him. For the first time since stepping into the line, Victor Harding felt something unexpected stir beneath his irritation. Not anger. Not superiority. Discomfort. And far above the clouds, as the aircraft leveled and the cabin settled into quiet, Victor had no idea that the calm man beside him, the one he had dismissed so easily, was about to become the mirror he had spent his entire life avoiding. The aircraft had settled into its cruising altitude, and with the initial turbulence behind them, a quiet rhythm took over the first-class cabin. Soft lighting reflected off polished surfaces. The low murmur of conversation blended with the distant hum of engines, creating the illusion of peace, comfort, and emotional distance from the world below. But for Victor Harding, comfort had begun to slip away. He shifted in his seat, adjusting his cuff, loosening his tie, then tightening it again, restless without knowing why. He kept glancing at the man beside him, irritated by the effortless calm that seemed to radiate from him. Keanu Reeves had not said much since their exchange, yet his silence felt louder than Victor's champagne-laced remarks. It wasn't passive. It was grounded. It felt like standing next to a lake so still it made you aware of your own noise. Victor took another slow sip of his drink, expecting the familiar comfort of luxury to return, but it didn't. Instead, it only sharpened his awareness of the strange imbalance between them. He was used to being the one people leaned away from, impressed by, curious about. Yet here, sitting beside a man dressed like he had stepped out of a roadside cafe instead of a first-class lounge, Victor felt subtly displaced. He didn't understand it, and because he didn't understand it, he resisted it. He cleared his throat, the sound sharper than necessary, and leaned back, attempting to reclaim the invisible territory he believed he had lost. "You really don't talk much," Victor said at last, his voice casual but edged with challenge. "Most people at least try to make an impression." Keanu turned slightly, acknowledging him with a calm glance. "I think people make more of an impression when they're not trying." Victor scoffed softly. "That's not how the world works. The world runs on perception. If you don't shape it, someone else will." Keanu considered that, not in debate but in reflection. "That might be true," he said, But I don't think shaping perception should cost us our humanity." The words landed gently, but Victor felt them hit something hard inside him. He shifted again, eyes flicking toward the aisle where a flight attendant passed, then back to Keanu. "Humanity doesn't pay the bills," he replied. "It doesn't build companies, it doesn't get you here." He gestured subtly around the cabin. Keanu followed the gesture, taking in the quiet luxury, the wide seats, the hushed respect, the insulation from discomfort. Then he looked back at Victor. "Neither does being here," he said softly. "This is just a seat." Victor laughed, but there was less humor in it than before. "You really believe that?" "I really do." Victor studied him more closely now. The calm wasn't ignorance. It wasn't avoidance. It was something else, something practiced, something earned. And for reasons he didn't like, Victor felt as if he were the one being examined. A middle-aged woman seated across the aisle had begun to notice the tension. She wasn't staring, but her eyes drifted toward them more often than coincidence would explain. 2 rows back, a man leaned slightly into the aisle, pretending to stretch, listening. The energy in first class was shifting, subtle but undeniable, like the air before rain. Victor felt it. He felt the cabin's attention slowly drifting away from him and toward the man he had dismissed. It irritated him more than he expected. "So," Victor said, straightening, "if you're not here to enjoy the privileges, why are you here at all?" Keanu smiled faintly, "To get somewhere." Victor frowned. "That's it." "That's enough." Victor exhaled through his nose. "You speak in these little phrases like they mean something profound, but real life is about results, titles, influence, power. Without those, people walk past you." Keanu nodded slowly. "Sometimes they do." "And you're fine with that?" "Yes." The answer was immediate, certain, and it unsettled Victor more than any argument could have. "You don't want to be seen," Victor pressed. Keanu met his gaze. "I want to be understood, and those aren't the same thing." Victor opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. He took another sip of champagne instead, the bubbles sharp against his tongue, the taste suddenly less pleasant than before. He leaned back, crossing his arms, trying to retreat into himself, but the words stayed with him. Understood, not seen. Across the aisle, the woman's curiosity deepened. She leaned subtly toward her seatmate, whispering something. The man 2 rows back had stopped pretending not to listen. Even the flight attendant, passing again, slowed slightly as she moved through their row. Victor noticed all of it. He was a man trained to read rooms, and this room was no longer his. "You know what I think," Victor said, lowering his voice as if sharing a private thought. "I think people who talk about humility usually do it because they don't have much else to show." Keanu didn't react immediately. He watched Victor the way one watches someone standing too close to a ledge, not judging, just aware. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe they talk about it because they've learned what happens when you don't." Victor's jaw tightened. "And what happens?" "You start confusing your worth with your position," Keanu replied. "And when that position is threatened, so are you." The cabin felt quieter suddenly, not because the engines had softened, but because attention had sharpened. Victor felt it on his skin, the invisible awareness of strangers. He glanced around, irritated, then back at Keanu. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right," Keanu said. "I don't, but I know what it looks like when someone is afraid of becoming invisible." Victor's fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. He felt a flicker of heat rise to his face. "I'm not afraid of anything." Keanu studied him, not skeptically, not challengingly, but gently. "Then why does it matter so much who belongs here?" The question slipped past Victor's defenses before he could stop it. For a split second, something surfaced behind his eyes, not anger, not pride, but something far less controlled, something close to panic. He masked it quickly with a laugh. "Because standards matter," he said, "because not everyone earns the same view." Keanu nodded slowly. "No," he said, "but everyone earns the same sky." Victor followed his gaze instinctively to the small window beside them, where nothing but endless blue stretched in all directions. For reasons he couldn't explain, the sight made his chest tighten. The woman across the aisle had stopped pretending. She was watching openly now. So was the man behind. A younger passenger near the front glanced back more than once. Something about this exchange had cut through the insulated luxury of first class and reminded people that they were, despite appearances, simply human beings in a metal tube suspended over nothing. Victor shifted again, feeling exposed. You talk like someone who's already given up, he said, like someone who decided not to play the game. Keanu smiled slightly, or like someone who played it long enough to realize it wasn't the only one. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. His reflection stared back at him faintly from the darkened screen of the seat in front. He barely recognized the tension in his own face. You really believe any of this changes anything? Victor asked. Kindness, perspective, humanity, you think any of that survives the real world? Keanu leaned back, folding his hands loosely. I think it's the only thing that does. The words settled into the cabin, heavier than Victor expected. He looked away, down at his hands, at the expensive watch hugging his wrist, at the subtle tremor he suddenly noticed in his fingers. He hadn't felt that tremor in years. Across the aisle, the woman's eyes softened. The man behind shifted uncomfortably. Someone near the front turned fully now, curiosity overcoming discretion. Victor felt surrounded in a way he had never experienced before. Not physically, morally, as though the room itself had begun to measure him and he was coming up short. You really think you're teaching me something, Victor said quietly. Keanu's voice was just as quiet when he replied. No, I think you're learning something. Victor inhaled sharply, ready to fire back, when the flight attendant appeared again, stopping beside Keanu with a polite smile that carried a hint of something warmer. Mr. Reeves, she said. The name slipped into the air like a dropped glass. And the cabin changed. Several heads lifted instantly. The woman across the aisle froze. The man behind straightened. The younger passenger's eyes widened. A ripple moved through first class, subtle but undeniable, like wind across tall grass. Victor felt it before he understood it. The shift, the attention, the sudden charge in the air. He turned slowly toward Keanu. Reeves, he repeated. Keanu looked up at the attendant. Yes. The captain asked me to let you know your connection has been confirmed, and he wanted to send his regards. Keanu nodded politely. Thank you. The attendant smiled, a little brighter now, then moved on. For a long moment, no one spoke. Victor stared at the man beside him, at the same calm expression, the same unassuming posture, the same quiet presence. Reeves, he said again, softer this time. Keanu met his eyes. And somewhere between the hum of the engines and the stunned silence of strangers, Victor Harding realized the ground beneath his confidence had been an illusion all along. The name lingered in the air long after the flight attendant had moved on. Reeves. It drifted through the cabin like a soft shockwave, subtle but impossible to ignore. Several passengers who had only half-listened before were now openly watching. The woman across the aisle had straightened fully in her seat, her earlier curiosity turning into certainty. The man behind leaned forward just enough to confirm what he thought he'd heard. A younger couple closer to the front whispered to each other, glancing back again and again. Recognition, once sparked, spreads quickly, and in a space as enclosed as a first-class cabin, it moved like fire through dry grass. Victor Harding felt it immediately, the invisible shift, the way attention reorganized itself, the way the social gravity of the space tilted, slowly but decisively, away from him. He stared at Keanu, trying to reconcile the quiet man beside him with the name that now echoed inside his mind. Keanu Reeves. The image assembled itself against his will, red carpets, interviews, posters, stories of kindness he had half-read and never cared about. And yet sitting here there were no trappings of that world, no armor of fame, no declaration of importance. Only the same faded shirt, the same calm eyes, the same presence that now felt less mysterious and more deliberate. Victor swallowed. You're that Reeves, he said finally, the edge gone from his voice. Keanu inclined his head slightly. I guess so. The simplicity of the response struck Victor harder than any boast could have. There was no correction, no emphasis, no subtle invitation to awe. It was as if the name meant very little to the man who carried it. A faint heat crept into Victor's face. He became acutely aware of the cabin, of how many people were now openly watching, of how different their gazes felt from before. Moments earlier, he had spoken as though he were instructing a nobody. Now he felt as though he had been standing on a stage, delivering a speech he no longer understood, to an audience that had already judged it hollow. I didn't know, Victor said too quickly. I mean, you didn't say. Keanu looked at him gently. You didn't ask. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. He shifted in his seat, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. If I had known who you were, I wouldn't have. Keanu's voice remained calm, but something firmer lived beneath it now. Then the problem would still be there, he said. It would just be wearing a different mask. Victor frowned. What do you mean? I mean, Keanu continued, if respect only appears after a name does, then it isn't respect. It's calculation. The words threaded through Victor's chest like a thin wire. He felt their tension, felt something inside him tug in response. Around them, the cabin had grown even quieter, as if everyone sensed that this moment was no longer about status, but about something far more personal. Victor tried to laugh it off. You're twisting this. Anyone would treat you differently if they knew who you were. Keanu studied him. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Victor looked away, jaw tightening. His gaze landed on the small oval window, on the endless white blue of clouds stretching below. For a brief, disorienting instant, he felt very high and very alone. You don't understand, Victor said, lowering his voice. The world I come from doesn't reward what you're talking about. It rewards presence, dominance, the ability to command a room. If you don't assert yourself, you disappear. Keanu leaned back slightly, giving Victor space but not retreating. Do you feel like you'd disappear, he asked, if you stopped asserting yourself for one day? Victor hesitated. The question reached somewhere he hadn't prepared to defend. I've built too much to disappear, he replied finally. Keanu nodded. Built, he repeated softly, or stacked. Victor's head snapped back toward him. What's that supposed to mean? It means structures that are stacked need constant guarding, Keanu said. Structures that are built tend to stand on their own. Victor felt irritation surge, but it tangled with something else he couldn't name. You're making assumptions, he said. You think because I value achievement that I don't value people. Keanu held his gaze. No, I think because you value achievement so loudly, you're afraid of what happens when it goes quiet. The words landed with a precision Victor had not expected. For a moment he forgot the cabin, forgot the eyes on him, forgot the first-class illusion of privacy. He felt instead an image rise uninvited in his mind. A younger version of himself in a narrow office, alone long after dark, the hum of fluorescent lights replacing the hum of engines, staring at numbers on a screen as if they could tell him who he was. He pushed the image away immediately, disturbed by its clarity. You don't know anything about my life, Victor said sharply. Keanu's voice did not rise to meet his. You're right, I don't, but I know what it looks like when someone has been running for a long time and doesn't remember what it was like to walk. Victor exhaled, a short, brittle sound. You think I'm running? Keanu did not answer immediately. He watched Victor not as an opponent, but as one might watch someone standing at the edge of a difficult truth. I think you're tired, he said at last. The word slipped past Victor's defenses because it was not an accusation. It was an observation. Tired? Victor's fingers curled against the armrest. He had not slept well in years. He told himself it was ambition. He told himself it was drive. He told himself it was the price of success. But sitting here under the steady gaze of a stranger who was not impressed by him, he felt the exhaustion beneath those stories stir. That's ridiculous, Victor said, but the protest lacked force. I don't get tired. Keanu tilted his head slightly. Then why does this matter so much? He asked, gesturing subtly to the space between them, to the earlier comments, to the need to define who belonged where. Why does a seat feel like territory? Victor's throat tightened. He glanced again at the watching passengers. The woman across the aisle had softened in her expression, concern replacing curiosity. The man behind looked almost pained. No one looked entertained anymore. I worked for everything I have, Victor said. No one handed it to me. I believe you, Keanu replied. But working for something doesn't mean it has to work you in return. Victor stared at him. The idea felt foreign, almost threatening. And what if it already has? Keanu continued quietly. What if the cost wasn't money or time, but the way you see people? Victor felt a pulse beat at the base of his throat. He shifted, then stilled, aware suddenly that movement would not help. You think I see people wrong? I think, Keanu said, choosing his words carefully, that you're looking at them through what they represent instead of who they are. Victor's mind jumped immediately to the line. The backpack, the boots, the judgments he had made in seconds. He opened his mouth to deny it, but the memory undercut him before the words could form. For the first time since they'd sat down, Victor fell completely silent. The hum of the engines seemed louder in the pause. The gentle clink of glass somewhere behind them felt intrusive. Keanu waited, not pressing, not retreating, simply allowing the silence to do what it often did best. Victor inhaled slowly. "You talk like this is all some lesson," he said, his voice lower now. "Like this is meant to change something." Keanu met his eyes. "I think moments change us whether we ask them to or not," he said. "The only question is whether we let them." Victor looked down at his hands again, at the watch, at the subtle tension in his fingers. "And if I do?" "Then this will just be a flight," Keanu replied, "and you'll get off exactly the same person who got on." Victor swallowed. "And if I do?" Keanu's gaze was steady. "Then maybe it will be something else." Victor didn't answer. He couldn't. Something in his chest felt as though it had been cracked open just enough to let air into a space that had been sealed for years. It wasn't relief. Not yet. It was something closer to fear, braided with the faintest hint of possibility. A few seats away, someone shifted, breaking the spell slightly, but the cabin remained attentive. Not to celebrity, to vulnerability. Victor lifted his eyes again. "You really don't care who knows your name, do you?" Keanu smiled, not amused, not proud, just sincere. "I care more about what people feel when they hear it." Victor absorbed that in silence. He thought of how often his own name had been used as leverage, as warning, as reward. He couldn't remember the last time it had been spoken gently. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The plane cut steadily through the sky, indifferent to the small human reckoning unfolding within it. Victor finally leaned back, exhaustion touching his features openly now. "You said earlier," he murmured, "that people get afraid of becoming invisible." Keanu nodded. Victor's voice dropped. "What if they already feel invisible, even when everyone sees them?" Keanu looked at him with quiet understanding. "Then maybe they've been performing instead of being." The words did not wound, they revealed. Victor closed his eyes briefly, and in that small, private darkness, something inside him finally admitted what he had spent years outrunning. He was not afraid of being invisible. He was afraid that without the image, there might be nothing left. And as he opened his eyes again, meeting Keanu's calm, unflinching gaze, Victor Harding realized he was standing in front of a mirror he could no longer turn away from. The silence between them stretched, heavy but not empty. It was the kind of silence that pressed inward instead of outward, forcing attention away from the world and back toward the self. The hum of the engines no longer felt like background noise, but like a steady reminder of motion, of inevitability, of time continuing whether anyone was ready or not. Victor Harding sat rigid in his seat, eyes forward, jaw set, yet something in his posture had shifted. The confident lines that once framed him had softened, as though the architecture of his certainty had begun to sag under a weight he could no longer hold aloft. Around them, first class had transformed from a place of quiet luxury into something more intimate and more uncomfortable. Conversations had faded. Devices lay idle. Several passengers pretended to read or rest, but their attention curved unmistakably toward the space Victor and Keanu occupied. It was not curiosity now. It was recognition of something human unfolding in a place designed to hide it. Victor inhaled slowly as though gathering courage, then exhaled through his nose. "You make it sound so simple," he said at last, "as if people can just decide to stop being who they are." Keanu turned slightly toward him. "I think people decide every day," he replied gently. "They just don't always notice when they're doing it." Victor shook his head faintly. "You don't understand the pressure, the expectations. Once people know who you are, they stop letting you be anything else. If I walk into a room uncertain, the room eats me alive." Keanu considered that. "Then the room has more power over you than you think." Victor's lips pressed together. "You say that like it's optional." "I think it is," Keanu said. "Not easy, but possible." Victor's gaze dropped again, this time lingering on nothing in particular. His reflection stared back faintly from the dark surface of the screen before him. He looked older than he expected. The lines around his eyes were deeper. The tension in his face more permanent. He barely recognized the man looking back. "You know what's funny," Victor said quietly. "When I was young, I thought success would make me feel solid, untouchable, like I'd finally arrive somewhere and rest, but it never came. Every milestone just moved the line." Keanu listened, fully present, offering neither interruption nor solution. "There's always someone richer," Victor continued. Someone younger, someone louder, someone who wants what you built, so you build more, you defend more, you become more, and somehow you feel less. His hand tightened around the armrest, knuckles paling. People think confidence feels like peace, he said. It doesn't, it feels like standing guard all the time. Keanu nodded slowly. Peace usually comes when the guard steps down. Victor let out a breath that was almost a laugh. And leave what unprotected. Keanu met his eyes. Yourself. The word lingered. Victor's jaw worked slightly as if he were chewing on something too hard. That sounds good, Victor said, but it's not how I survived. Keanu's voice softened. It might be how you live. The distinction landed. Survive. Live. Victor felt the difference resonate inside him, echoing against spaces he had kept sealed. He shifted again, discomfort rippling through him, but he did not retreat. You really believe all this? Victor said. Keanu's gaze was steady. I do. And you don't ever feel the pull? Victor asked. The need to remind people who you are. Keanu smiled faintly, not amused but understanding. Of course I do, he said. I'm human, but I've learned that the louder I remind people, the quieter I become to myself. Victor looked at him sharply. And you're fine with that? I'm more than fine, Keanu replied. I'm present. Victor leaned back, the words striking him in an unexpected way. Present, not impressive, not dominant, not untouchable, present. A small sound escaped Victor's throat. He looked away again, this time unable to meet Keanu's gaze. His breathing had changed, shallow now, uneven. You don't know what it's like, Victor said suddenly, the words carrying an edge he hadn't intended. To come from nothing, to have to make people see you, to claw your way into rooms where you're not wanted. Keanu's eyes did not leave him. I know what it's like, he said quietly, to feel unseen. Victor's head turned back toward him. I know what it's like to lose people, Keanu continued. To fail, to be misunderstood, to watch parts of your life fall away and realize no amount of recognition fills that space. Victor stared, something flickering across his face. He did not ask. He did not need to. The weight behind the words was evident. You don't build a life without knowing emptiness, Keanu said. You just decide whether you let it harden you or open you. Victor's throat tightened. He swallowed. And what if it already hardened me? Keanu regarded him carefully. Then you wouldn't be asking. Victor let out a shaky breath. He looked around, suddenly aware again of the cabin, of the passengers who had become silent witnesses to something deeply personal. The woman across the aisle had brought her hand to her chest without realizing it. The man behind sat completely still, his earlier posture of curiosity replaced by something like concern. Victor's composure wavered. You keep talking about what's inside, Victor said, his voice lower now, less controlled. About who we are when the noise stops, but what if someone doesn't like what they find there? Keanu's answer came without hesitation. Then they're finally in a position to change it. Victor shook his head faintly. You make it sound like a choice. I think it is, Keanu said. Not a single one, 1,000 small ones. Victor's breathing quickened. He pressed his lips together, then apart, then together again. The effort to maintain his usual control had become visible now, etched into his face, his posture, his hands. You don't get it, Victor said suddenly, and something in his voice broke. If I stop being this person, I don't know who I am. The words fell into the cabin like a dropped object, solid and undeniable. Keanu's expression changed then, not dramatically but perceptibly. The gentleness deepened into something closer to compassion. That's not a failure, he said. That's the beginning. Victor's chest rose sharply. He turned his head away, eyes fixed on the window on the unbroken expanse of cloud. For a moment he said nothing. The silence now felt fragile, stretched thin. I spent my whole life becoming someone, Victor murmured. I never thought about being someone. Keanu remained still, allowing the truth to breathe. And now, Victor continued, you're telling me that the person I became might not be the person I am. I'm saying, Keanu replied softly, that the person you became might be a door, not a destination. Victor's hand trembled against the armrest. He noticed it. So did Keanu. So did the woman across the aisle, whose eyes glistened faintly in the low light. Victor inhaled, deeper this time, as though bracing himself. You don't even know me, he said, but there was no challenge left in the words. I know this moment, Keanu said, and sometimes that's enough. Victor turned back to him, and for the first time since they had met, the confidence was gone entirely. In its place was something raw, unsettled, undeniably human. What if I don't like what I am without all of this? Victor asked. Keanu held his gaze. Then you haven't finished meeting yourself. Victor's eyes burned. He blinked hard, then again, surprised by the sensation. He drew a slow breath, then another, fighting something that rose uninvited. You talk about change, Victor said quietly, but change costs something. Yes, Keanu replied. It usually costs the lie that kept us comfortable. Victor closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, the moisture had not fully retreated. He looked around again at the watching cabin, at the strangers who had become witnesses, not to a spectacle but to a fracture. I thought power was control, Victor said, but I've never felt less in control than I do right now. Keanu nodded. That's often what honesty feels like at first. Victor let out a breath that trembled at its end. His shoulders sagged slightly, as though he had set something down he had been carrying for years. I don't know how to be anyone else, he said. Keanu's voice was steady. You don't have to know yet. Victor's eyes met his. Then what do I do? Keanu answered simply, you stay. The word hung between them. Stay with the discomfort, with the uncertainty, with the truth that had begun to surface. And in that suspended space, high above the world he had spent his life trying to rise above, Victor Harding felt something inside him finally give way, not into defeat but into exposure. The breaking point had not come with shouting or spectacle. It had come with a confession. And he knew, with a clarity that frightened him, that there was no returning to the man who had boarded this plane. The moment after Victor's confession did not bring relief. It brought stillness. Not the comfortable quiet of luxury, but the vulnerable stillness that follows truth, when a person realizes the words they have released cannot be gathered back into themselves. The hum of the engines continued as it always had, steady and indifferent, yet Victor felt as though something inside him had finally gone silent, something that had been making noise for so long he had forgotten it was there. He remained seated, shoulders lowered, eyes unfocused, as if he were adjusting to a gravity he had never experienced before. Around them, the first-class cabin held its breath. Passengers who had once been wrapped in their own worlds now shared a collective awareness, not of celebrity, not of luxury, but of a man unraveling and the quiet presence of another who had not come to dominate the moment, but to hold it. The woman across the aisle had not looked away. The man behind had straightened, his face no longer curious but thoughtful. Even the flight attendant who passed through the aisle slowed unconsciously, sensing something delicate unfolding. Victor finally spoke again, but his voice was softer, stripped of the edge that had defined it earlier. I always thought humility was a word people used when they lost, he said. Something you considered when you didn't make it to the top. He paused, drawing in a slow breath. Now I'm sitting here, supposedly at the top of something, and I don't feel like I've won anything. Keanu listened without interrupting, his posture unchanged, yet his attention absolute. I can't remember the last time I let myself just be tired, Victor continued. Not productive tired, not victorious tired, just tired, the kind where you don't need to justify it. He glanced down at his hands. Everything in my life needs a reason, an outcome, a return, even rest. Keanu nodded slowly. That's not rest, he said. That's another transaction. Victor's mouth curved faintly, almost in recognition. That's exactly what it feels like, he murmured. Like my whole existence has been one long negotiation. Silence followed, but it was no longer heavy. It felt like space. You know, Victor said after a while, when you first stood in front of me in that line, I didn't see a person. I saw a problem, something that didn't match the picture in my head, and instead of asking why, I tried to push it out of the frame. He shook his head slightly. I've done that my whole life. Keanu turned his head just enough to meet Victor's eyes again. We all do it, he said. The question is whether we notice when we're doing it. Victor swallowed. I didn't, not until now. His gaze moved slowly around the cabin, taking in faces he had previously filtered as background. He noticed the subtle expressions, the stillness, the shared humanity in strangers who minutes earlier had meant nothing to him. It's strange, he said quietly. The moment I stopped trying to be the most important person here, everyone started to feel more real. Keanu's expression softened. Because they were always real, he said. You were just busy being louder. Victor exhaled, a slow, uneven breath. I thought confidence meant never letting anyone see you bend, he admitted. Now it feels like the only honest thing I've done in years. Keanu regarded him steadily. Confidence that can't bend usually breaks, he said. Victor nodded faintly. He could feel something inside him rearranging, not dramatically, but fundamentally, like furniture moved in a dark room. He didn't yet know the new layout, but he could sense that the old one was gone. I don't even know what I'm supposed to apologize for anymore, Victor said. At first, it was just the things I said to you. But now, he hesitated. Now it feels like I owe something to people I haven't even met yet. Keanu considered that. Maybe you don't owe them anything, he said. Maybe you're just ready to see them. Victor let the words settle. He leaned back, eyes drifting toward the ceiling where soft lights glowed like distant stars. Seeing people, he repeated quietly. That sounds simple, but it feels harder than anything I've built. Because building often keeps us busy, Keanu replied. Seeing asks us to be still. Victor turned toward him again. And you think that's where it starts? I think that's where it continues, Keanu said. The woman across the aisle shifted, her hand still resting near her chest. Victor noticed her for the first time, truly noticed her, and something about her quiet attention moved him more than any applause ever had. He realized that earlier he would have categorized her instantly: age, clothing, relevance. Now he simply wondered who she was. You didn't come here to teach me anything, Victor said suddenly. Keanu smiled faintly. No. But you did. Keanu shook his head. You taught yourself, I just stayed. Victor absorbed that, stay. The word echoed again, but differently now, not as endurance, as presence. I don't know what happens when this plane lands, Victor said. I don't know how much of this will survive once I'm back in my world. Keanu met his gaze. Then don't think about surviving it, he said. Think about practicing it. Victor frowned slightly. Practicing what? Not needing to win every moment, Keanu replied. Not needing to dominate every room, practicing listening, practicing being wrong, practicing letting someone else exist without measuring them. Victor nodded slowly. That feels unfamiliar. Most honest things do at first, Keanu said. Another pause settled between them, but this one carried something gentler. Victor felt a faint, unexpected sensation stir in his chest. Not pride, not relief, something closer to gratitude, though he wasn't sure for what exactly. I don't know how to thank you, Victor said. Keanu's voice was quiet. You don't have to, just don't waste the moment. Victor looked at him, truly looked at him, not as a symbol, not as a name, but as a person who had chosen not to perform power when he could have, who had chosen not to humiliate when it would have been easy, who had chosen to remain human in a space designed to reward hierarchy. I won't forget this, Victor said. Keanu nodded. You might, he said gently. Memory fades, but something else won't. Victor tilted his head. What? The feeling, Keanu replied. The sense of where you were when you saw yourself clearly, that stays. Victor let out a quiet breath, something like a release. He stared again at his hands, but they no longer looked like tools, they looked like his. As the plane began its gradual descent, the shift in atmosphere was unmistakable. The light dimmed. The engines changed their song. The cabin prepared not just for landing, but for separation. Passengers began to move again, slowly, reluctantly, as if emerging from a shared dream. Victor straightened, though his posture was different now, less guarded, less arranged. I think, he said, that I've spent years trying to climb above people when all I really wanted was to stand among them. Keanu's eyes held quiet understanding. Then maybe this is where you start. Victor nodded once, and in that small, unremarkable motion, he felt the weight of a lifetime of performances begin, finally, to loosen. The aircraft began its descent with a subtle shift in its voice, a lowering of pitch that signaled movement toward the ground. Lights dimmed slightly, and the soft chime of the seatbelt sign rippled through the cabin like a gentle instruction rather than a command. Outside the windows, the endless blue gave way to layers of cloud, then faint outlines of land, the world slowly returning after hours suspended above it. For most passengers, it was a routine transition. For Victor Harding, it felt like the approach to something he could not yet name. He sat quietly now, hands resting loosely on his thighs, no longer gripping anything for certainty. His breathing had slowed. His gaze drifted between the window and the man beside him, as if anchoring himself to both the outer and inner worlds at once. The turbulence of earlier had not been in the air. It had been in him. And now, as the plane began to steady itself toward arrival, something inside him felt steadier too, though unfamiliar. Around them, first class gradually returned to motion. People adjusted seats, gathered belongings, whispered about connections and schedules. Yet the emotional residue of what had unfolded had not evaporated. Several passengers glanced at Victor with expressions that were no longer disapproving, no longer curious, but quietly reflective. The woman across the aisle offered him the smallest nod, not as judgment, not as approval, but as recognition. Victor felt it, and instead of bristling, he felt included. Keanu reached down and drew his worn backpack closer, setting it on his lap. The simple gesture struck Victor in an unexpected way. It was so ordinary, so unremarkable, and yet it carried more presence than any dramatic movement Victor could remember making in recent years. "You know," Victor said quietly, "I've flown first class more times than I can count. I don't remember a single one of them." Keanu looked at him gently. "You'll remember this one." Victor nodded. "Not because of you being who you are," he added, "but because of who I wasn't and who I might be." Keanu smiled faintly. "Those are usually the flights that matter." The wheels touched down not long after, the muted impact reverberating through the cabin, the long glide slowing into contact, friction, reality. The city emerged beyond the windows, lights and buildings and movement returning in steady detail. As the aircraft rolled toward the gate, Victor felt an unexpected tightening in his chest, not from anxiety, but from the awareness that something essential was ending. The plane came to a stop. The final chime sounded. Overhead compartments opened. The spell of stillness dissolved into practical motion. People stood, bags shifted, conversations resumed. Keanu rose easily, slinging the backpack over one shoulder. Victor stood as well, adjusting his jacket, though he noticed he did it more out of habit than necessity. For a moment, neither moved forward. Victor turned to him. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "I won't forget this." Keanu met his eyes. "Then don't make it about me," he replied. "Make it about the next person you don't notice." Victor felt something warm and unfamiliar move through him at that. He nodded once, a deeper nod than before. As the aisle began to flow, they stepped forward together. Near the exit, something subtle but unmistakable happened. A small cluster of passengers had gathered just beyond the door, phones held discreetly, faces bright with recognition. A few murmured Keanu's name softly, respectfully, not as a demand but as a greeting. Keanu paused, offering quiet smiles, brief words, patient attention. There was no performance in it, no hurry, no distance. Victor stood a step behind him, watching. He saw the way Keanu met each person's eyes, the way he listened fully even when the exchange was brief. The way gratitude moved through the moment without needing spectacle. It struck Victor then that this was what presence looked like in motion. Not invisibility, not dominance, availability. One of the passengers, an older man with tired eyes, thanked Keanu not for a film, but for the way you carry yourself. Keanu smiled and said simply, "We're all just trying to carry something." When Keanu turned back toward the aisle, Victor was still standing there. "You see," Keanu said softly, "names open doors, but how you walk through them is what people remember." Victor nodded, feeling the truth of it settle. They disembarked into the terminal where the airport's vastness opened around them once more. Sounds layered. Announcements echoed. Footsteps multiplied. Life rushed back in. Yet Victor felt as though he were moving through it differently now, not above it, not against it, but within it. Near the end of the jet bridge, a young airport worker hesitated, then stepped forward shyly to greet Keanu. Keanu took the time to speak with him, to listen to a nervous sentence about inspiration, to thank him for his work. Victor watched the exchange and noticed something that made his throat tighten. The worker walked away lighter, straighter, as though he had been seen. Keanu turned back, and their eyes met one final time. "Take care, Victor," he said. Victor was startled. He hadn't remembered introducing himself. "Thank you," Victor replied. The words felt insufficient, but they were honest. Keanu inclined his head and merged into the current of the terminal, disappearing not with spectacle, but with quiet inevitability, as though he had always been part of the crowd rather than apart from it. Victor remained where he was for a moment, standing still while people moved around him, while wheels rolled past and voices blurred. He looked down at his hands again, at the familiar watch, the familiar suit, the familiar symbols. They had not changed, but the way he saw them had. He thought of the line, of the judgments, of the ease with which he had tried to make himself larger by making someone else smaller, and he felt not shame that crushed him, but clarity that steadied him. As he finally began to walk, he slowed his pace deliberately. He noticed the tired mother guiding a child by the hand, the cleaner pushing a cart along the wall, the couple reuniting in the distance. He did not categorize them. He did not measure them. He simply let them be real. And for the first time in a very long time, Victor Harding felt himself do the same. Because true status, he now understood, was not where you sat. It was how you stood when no one was asking you to perform. True power was not in reminding people who you were. It was in remembering who they were. And true success was not something that separated you from others. It was something that brought you back to them. As Victor stepped into the living, breathing tide of the terminal, he carried no trophy from this flight. No proof, no visible reward. He carried something rarer. The quiet knowledge that he had been seen. And the even rarer understanding that now, finally, he was ready to see.